So I'm really pleased to be able to announce the intention to develop an international criminal court for sustainability in New Zealand with the support of leading world criminal barrister Michael Mansfield, who has supported my legal arguments to the I.C.C. For environmental protection for years. And it's just come at a really important, I have been saying that we need an international criminal court for sustainability for years, literally up to 6 years ago I had that published as the lead-in on my website, on my agency website, sustainablequalitypurpose.com. And the interesting thing about the timing right now is that my work is absolute proof that the ETS trading scheme is a complete fraud that actually extends sovereign power over our tax system to the United Nations, collects billions in your tax dollars that you work hard to produce and pay, which you shouldn't even need to pay, to be honest, in the right financial system, in an honest financial system. And that money is then either transferred to the UN to finance effectively the world government that Bill Gates and the Pope are constantly talking about these days since the Paris Agreement was last signed by all nations in April. And the other thing that it does is then they transfer your taxes off to people like Robert Mugabe or the leaders of China or India. Your taxes going to those countries to pay for them to stop polluting, which they should do anyway, when they have way more billionaires than we could ever hope to have. Well, unless we have monetary reform, which I completely advocate, so touch wood, I talk too soon. But the point is, why are New Zealand tax dollars being transferred off to pay for foreign companies to meet their promises to reduce pollution? Shouldn't they just reduce the pollution anyway? They're certainly not short on money, some of these countries. They can be called developed for as long as they want, but they have so much wealth, they have so many billionaires, and their poverty exists because of massive corruption. And New Zealanders should not have to pay anything for their lack of ethics around not voluntarily transitioning without needing bribes from our tax money, and or just their disinterest in doing so. If they want to pollute their own air and water and soil and contaminate their entire population and destroy their future, then surely that is their responsibility and their choice. Look, the point is, but as much as I believe in sharing and caring, which I genuinely do, okay, so let's go back to this point. The Paris Agreement ties us to pay $14 billion in taxes in the next 10 years alone, but ultimately it triggers tools and management groups to come to New Zealand and re-engineer our entire economy based on carbon, the measure of carbon. Now, although this is not so relevant, carbon is 0.04% of the Earth's air molecules. That means it's 33 out of every 86,800 air molecules, and only one of the 33 is industrial carbon. It is also famously recycles itself out of the atmosphere within 4 to 5 years. Okay, historically, before Al Gore did his Inconvenient Truth movie and kind of persuaded the world that we had to be terrified of climate change so that we handed over sovereign control of our tax systems to the UN and the shadow government who sits behind them ensures they do nothing to uphold the Declaration of Human Rights and everything to preside over multiple wars that continue seemingly without end. If you look at Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan and half of Africa. So, there is an absolute corruption problem in the leadership or the powers behind the leadership at the UN. That is certain, okay? So for a start, transferring billions of dollars of New Zealand taxes, more than we already do, out to the UN, where I'm not going to say the jokes that I actually really make in private about the UN, but because that wouldn't be appropriate, because people are very conservative in New Zealand, I've discovered. So, okay, keeping those to myself. But other than that thing I won't tell you, the UN I wouldn't trust them with 1 cent, let alone billions more in taxes to allocate on my behalf. Look, if we want to help India transition, let's go and give $14 billion to India ourselves, or any other country. Let's sponsor one country a year, $3 billion in transition money. And then hold them accountable. Let's sign a contract with them which is legally enforceable, which the Paris Agreement is not. Okay, that's the joke. Okay, so let's go back to emission trading schemes that Jacinda has announced that she's going to implement on every aspect of New Zealand life, which is either one of two things. It illustrates a gross deficiency in intellect, okay? Or she is aware that this is a fraud and she's participating in forcing it on the New Zealand people anyway at great cost and potential threat to our sovereignty, in which case I believe criminally liable. So I don't know which it is. Either she's intelligent enough to understand it, and therefore that's self-incriminating for participating in this fraud, or she does not have the intellect to understand it, therefore definitely not the intellect to run the country of New Zealand. Look, the fact is that we have an alternative. My work in the Rome Statute of the I.C.C, interpreting that against industrial destruction, okay, and I was the first to do that in the world, and I've been the only one to do that. And I've got 7 cases registered to protect our major ecosystems from industrial contamination. And to force sustainable transition effectively, because as soon as you criminalise and financially penalise those who are investing in destructive industry that causes ill health and harm to humans and all life surrounding, then suddenly investors won't want to invest in pollution and destruction anymore, because not only will they not be able to retain their profit, not only will some of them who have earned a fortune off destroying be removed of all their profit by the court, but they will have the potential for 30 years to life imprisonment for accountability for one of the world's greatest crimes, which is mass destruction against entire communities, entire cities, entire populations, and entire ecosystems that we all need to sustain life for future generations here. Okay, so criminal and financial liability focused on the industrialists. Okay, so this is not about billing the cost of industrialists, the cost of the environmental harm to the taxpayers, while the industrialists continue unlimited to extract fossil fuels for great profit. And their maximum penalty under the Paris Agreement is that they will have a slightly higher cost of doing business, maybe, on taxes. But most of these guys get massive tax exemptions anyway. So, it's almost certainly not going to affect their business or provide any further liability at all, while it provides absolutely enormous levels of new liability for the consumers. Okay, it's not constructive. Now, we can voluntarily completely transition New Zealand's energy system, voluntarily. Okay, we don't need a Paris Agreement where we pay 14 billion of taxes overseas, get nothing in direct return. That money finances the New World government who control our tax system and our sovereignty eventually, and gets passed on to some of the wealthiest leaders of corrupt nations in the world. Why? When we can decide not to export oil, to use what we need until we completely transition based on new technologies available that make it possible to have completely clean energy in New Zealand. Okay, that we transition our vehicle systems, whether it be kinetic energy combined with solar energy, combined with a dual battery in each car, recharging one after the other as they're used, and then charging it as you run with solar and kinetic energy. It's totally possible. Or hydrogen fuel cells based on water energy, water creating hydrogen energy, not natural gas, which it requires fracking. And, at the debate the other day with Maggie Barry, she said really clearly that, the national government was supporting natural gas, which is fracking, which absolutely devastates and contaminates the environment that people live in. It destroys their water, it destroys quality of life, it destroys health. It's not acceptable. These are criminal acts, and they need to start being realised as such, because we have the natural alternatives that just don't profit certain people in their old business model of coal or gas or oil. It profits new people who have the technology for change. Okay, but they're blocked from market. They're not given a market until they're sort of forced into shared ownership with these other people who control these systems. And that's getting very complicated. But at the end of the day, we can completely and voluntarily transition agriculture. I mean, I'm tired of hearing sort of Jacinda or Bill make speeches about making our rivers swimmable and protecting them. At the end of the day, under the national government and the Labour government, our rivers were polluted. Okay, and then you've got the Greens on top saying, so we should charge a carbon tax to producers so that, or carbon tax to whoever, but the Greens definitely say to producers, so that the farmers are not charged for the cost of transitioning, which is totally absurd because the farmers own the producers. So effectively you're forcing debt on them where they can't already afford to pay their interest rates to the foreign banks, by the way, who are in control of this and like them spraying nitrogen and toxic chemicals on our land. But you increasing their interest rate effectively by force immediately, because if you want to transition half the farms to organics by 2025, then you better get going because it takes at least 7 years. So quick, win and, force it upon people within 1 year, I guess. But then to say on the other side that you're going to charge this totally fake carbon tax. Don't get me wrong. I mean, this is my area of speciality. I've got 7 legal arguments on this case. I've argued this for years. I have researched myself out of believing that carbon is a toxic pollutant when unless you're killing people with your breath, or unless the gas that the oceans breathe in and that the trees breathe in to stay alive, and then from that they generate all of our oxygen. Then that magical gas that sustains all life on Earth is the last thing that is going to be a pollutant, okay? But whilst it may have negative impact in super high levels, that is irrelevant if you stop the industrial contamination at the source, because that is where the problem is coming from. It's the contamination and pollution. Now, I say again, the interesting thing about the Paris Agreement is that it doesn't include carbon monoxide. Now, any normal person, when they think about pollution, they're going to think about the fuel exhaust pollution coming from your car, right? And you think, oh, well, that's what's being taxed when you hear the word carbon. Nuh-uh. It's absolutely not. It's left out of the agreement. So that's, again, because this agreement enables the industrialists to get off without paying a cent. And it puts all the cost onto the taxpayers, and maybe a little bit of a higher cost of doing business through tax onto the companies, but very maybe and very little. They still walk away with excessive profits. Okay, so the contamination of our water, soil, air, and oceans at the point of extraction of these fossil fuels is not being taxed at all. And it's not even limited in any way by the Paris Agreement. So all of the industrial developments that I fight, for example, through the Amazon, are going full steam ahead. In fact, China signed the Paris Agreement when I was last in Ecuador at the end of 2016 and in November and December. The Chinese president landed on the same day as me and signed up 11 new industrial deals on the rainforest lands of the indigenous leaders who I represent to the UN and the I.C.C. Against great odds, because remember, the UN does not care about indigenous people. That is a fact. I've proven it beyond a shadow of a doubt. They openly say, the Chief Secretariat openly says that she is there working for the governments, and the governments are signing the contracts to destroy their land and pollute their water so that they literally will be exterminated. And so my efforts to argue the 2 legal mechanisms that could protect them are irritating to her, the Chief Secretariat for Indigenous Affairs of the UN, because her job is to protect the governments. So the point is that, that's one side, and I should come back to New Zealand, but the point is it's the same really with us. There's no one here protecting us. The governments are signing up fracking or oil or coal. Anyone who lives in proximity is being literally contaminated to ill health or premature death. It is a long, slow, insidious genocide. There is no time limit on the word genocide. You don't need to take out a gun and shoot 20,000 people in a day. It can be done over a long period of time by people being aware that they are poisoning other people to death while in pursuit of profit for resources and technology systems that are out of date, that can be replaced, and no longer need to harm anyone in order to get energy. Okay, so the point is that this tax, let's get back to the tax, this emissions trading tax, it re-engineers our entire society based on a fraudulent concept of carbon being the greatest pollutant in the world, and effectively it hands over control of our tax system to the United Nations or to an international unipolar governance power that sits behind them. Okay, it's a threat to our sovereignty, it's not honest, and it does not do anything to hold the industrialists criminally or financially liable for the massive contamination of our health that has occurred for so many years, which is which is not acceptable, okay? So I have proposed the development of an international criminal court for sustainability for many years now, and every single one of my legal arguments to the I.C.C. that I've lobbied to some of the top levels of power around the world and to the UN, okay? And that concept of an international criminal court for sustainability utilises existing law that I identified possible to hold industrialists criminally and financially liable at every level. As I said, all of their money related directly or indirectly to the crime and to the individual's decision makers criminally liable for the crime can be seized by the court and put in trust to afford the sustainable transition of the nation. That is amazing. That is a budget that is, so worthy of being used in that way, and that is a penalty for those people who have knowingly destroyed and contaminated and devastated us and future generations for their own profit. They do not deserve their fortunes. It can force businesses into a situation where they have to voluntarily and immediately transition in order to retain their profits, which is really important. So that can be used really constructively, for example, with farmers, not charging them any new carbon taxes. Structuring finance at a level where their interest payments or level of interest payments are delayed, for example, in order to finance the transition of their farms. It means they must transition, but it's not done in a way of, piling unreasonable structures of debt on them and lowering their payouts and not guaranteeing them any value-add premium on the other side for the higher cost of transitioning to organics and regenerative farming, okay? So it's a methodical way. So I don't like it when I see top, saying, oh, environment is our number one priority and then proposing carbon tax, because it's like, well, we all know our environment is our number one priority. That shouldn't win you a vote, that slogan. And the other thing is that, carbon tax is a complete fraud and it does nothing to stop the industrial destruction that is harming the environment, but it just slightly reduces the profit of those who are doing so unrestricted, okay? So the point is that out of all of the parties, and part of the impetus why I launched the Logic Party here in New Zealand is my work in environmental defence, bar none, leads the way, okay? It is under existing law, constructively and completely forces the transition, holding those responsible for causing the harm, the industrialists and their financiers and their licensors, the politicians who have naughtily done that, well, that's a nice way to put it, responsible, criminally responsible, financially responsible for the harm that has been caused, forcing them to stop the fossil fuels, forcing them to end the destruction under law that exists now. They can be prosecuted tomorrow. So, longest video ever, but here's my ending. I have proposed an international criminal court for sustainability that would be built on the North Shore, it wouldn't increase rates. It would be using the public credit line of the cooperative credit clearing digital currency that I'll go into in other videos, but to afford quite reasonably to build and construct and then finance these cases to lead the world as the epicenter for sustainable justice, which is something that we desperately need. We are able to prosecute environmental destruction crimes to prevent the harm from advancing. We are able to prosecute monetary crimes to prevent the economic devastation of populations now and in the future, because the banking system needs to be addressed in this way. It is a criminal activity, I believe, at the moment. And we are able to address preemptively these illegal war narratives that are instrumentalizing media networks. It's a media defense industrial political complex that are warmongering to make billions in profits on selling arms. They only have to do a couple of false flags, send a rogue bomb over Japan. They intentionally deleted the arms embargo off Japan a few years ago and have been piling weapons upon them. That was party talk in New York last year, waiting for the inevitable conflict that they want to occur between Japan and China. This stuff is so orchestrated and structured. We've had war after war after war where the media has fed us false narratives to believe that full military force to explode people alive all over a country and devastate their cities, their property, their family, their human rights, devastate everything, if not kill them by military force, and in this case they're talking nuclear force, is highly, highly illegal. And that narrative is illegal. Publicly inciting and inducing the commission of a crime, whether you're just a part of it, knowing that it will lead to war crimes of wanton property destruction and mass killing, it's a crime. You're the beginning of it. That's Nikki Haley right now, that's Trump, and that's any of the media who are participating in false narratives to drive forward these wars. And that can also become a core part of the prosecutions of an international criminal court for sustainability, established here on the North Shore, and as I've said, with some of the world's leading barristers, including Michael Mansfield QC, behind it. It's a game changer, and it blows the ETS that Jacinda has proposed out of complete naivety out of the water. It's the best way forward, and New Zealand public need to come to realise this, because if we let billions of our taxes start to channel off to the UN and channel off to other countries all over the world for nothing in return, it's just the beginning. It's a massive, massive transfer of wealth and sovereign power that we can stop. Thanks for listening. Ciao.